Hi, I'm Eileen Build with Hotel Talk, and today I have Peter Canova with us, and he is has published a new book called Quantum Spirituality. But first, I want to let you know who Peter is. He's an international businessman who decided to write novels after undergoing a series of spiritual experiences that altered the course of his life. Peter had a strong affinity for writing and communicating. In the early 2000s, he acted on this talent, winning a grand literary prize for his very first short story at the highly respected Santa Barbara's Writers Conference in California. So, Peter, you talk about the origin and purpose and destiny of humanity grounded on quantum science and an ancient universal spiritual tradition that has been lost to the West for 2,000 years. So welcome to the show, and I can't wait to talk about quantum spirituality. So can you define that for us?
Yeah, well, quantum spirituality, I mean, if you really funnel it all down, what it's all about is trying to help people gain experiences with higher consciousness, a direct contact with higher consciousness. And in order to do that, I created this book as kind of a roadmap. And like any map, it needs two coordinates, like an X and Y axis or a latitude and longitude. And the coordinates that I use were ancient mystical wisdom and modern quantum science, and they are very connected. Both of them at their core deal with two things, which is light, energy, and matter. They deal with the origin of those subjects because that really is the origin of reality. We are composed of energy and matter. So when you study those things, essentially you're studying us and you're studying everything else in the universe besides us. So it's not that unusual that these two disciplines kind of intersected. Maybe what's unique is that I think I'm maybe the first one that I know of to go into specific detail of how these suppressed mystical texts that were accidentally recovered in 1945 reflected every major theory of quantum physics, such as the God particle, parallel universes, and the Big Bang. But what it's really all about is providing an arena of knowledge and information to help people on their spiritual journey.
That sounds great and wonderful. And in my own experience, I've always found it fascinating how science and spirituality often like butted heads with each other. So I think your book brings them back together and shows how they really are connected. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the that connection between the quantum level and the consciousness level that you weave throughout your book, so that the average person who may not have studied it or may not, have awakened and they're not aware of the knowledge that you presented in your book, can you bring it down to, kind of like the grounded level and help us understand what you're talking about?
Right. Well, really, it's all a play of light. What quantum physics tells us, and you must understand, I'm going to preface this by saying that the mind-blowing thing about quantum physics is that the microscopic world of subatomic particles and so forth is the world on which our macroscopic world of visible three-dimensional objects is built. And yet it operates nothing like what we experience with our senses at that level. Because at the most fundamental levels of reality, scientists have long found that there are no such thing as particles. Okay, let me repeat that. What we think of as the basis that makes our so-called solid visible world as particles, they don't exist at the most fundamental levels of reality. What exists are waves of light energy. And under certain circumstances, the quantum wave can collapse into particle form. And as an aside, if you want to get into this later, human consciousness has a role in doing that. But really, everything is made of light. So in the early 1900s, the founder, or I would call him the founder or grandfather of modern quantum physics, was a German physicist named Max Planck. And he started to study the properties of light. And he discovered some interesting things. Everybody thought that, light was this smooth, continuous phenomenon. And Max Planck found, no, not at all. It actually arrives in these separated, discrete little packets of energy that he called quanta. And that's where we get the term quantum physics from. But to make a long story short, Max Planck was probably the first one to articulate the fact that not only was light energy the basis of the universe, but there was an intelligence behind light. And I'm going to read you a quote from him, and it's going to sound like some kind of a new age guru spouting some things, but I want everybody to remember that what I'm telling you comes straight from the father of quantum physics. And Max Planck said, "I can tell you, as a result of my research about the atoms, this much: there is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration. Behind the existence of all matter is a conscious, intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." Okay, that's the father of quantum physics. Now, Albert Einstein comes along a little bit later. There were several other experiments besides Einstein that emphasize the point that Max Planck makes here, but Einstein's famous E equals MC squared, which probably most people in the audience are familiar with. Well, this is exactly what it says. It says that matter and energy are the same thing, that matter is simply a lower vibratory form of energy, and matter comes from energy. So supposedly solid matter comes from immaterial, invisible energy. And the atoms and the subatomic particles are 99% light, energy, and space, and only 1% mass or matter. But we focus on the 1% to the exclusion of the 99%, because that's how our perceptual world is built. It's really, what it really indicates is that we live in a virtual simulation. We live in an illusion, because what we think is reality in terms of what we detect by the physical senses is just the tip of the iceberg. There's many dimensions that precede ours and that make our dimension possible. And these are usually dimensions of higher vibratory energies.
Thank you for all that wonderful information. And what comes to mind for me is, how does someone wrap their brain around all of that to say, well, am I really real? You know, is the table next to me, is that really solid? And the idea of we're living in an illusion can really throw people off and make them question everything about life and living. So how do we take your information in this book and what you're sharing today and make some sense of it, so that, you know, we don't become fearful, but we embrace it and understand it to be able to apply what we learn to everyday life, so we can still enjoy the physical experience, but not fear that, are we really here? You know, are we going to like disappear?
Well, you don't have to deny physical experience. I mean, really what physical experience is it's a series of electromagnetic algorithms that create all the forms and shapes that we see. And we don't actually see anything out there, okay? Anything you're looking at right now, whatever object it is, you don't really see it out there. What you see is an electromagnetic representation that registers on the cones and rods of your eyes, and you actually experience that object inside your dark skull in the back of your brain. So you're not really seeing it out there. So, you know, but that does that mean it's not real and you can step in front of a truck and it'll go right through you? No, that you know, please don't take it like that. That's not what it's saying. These things are, you know, very real, but real in a limited sense. It's only a you know, like you talk about the light spectrum, and we can only see, you know, certain amounts in the light spectrum of visible light, but then there's things like infrared and ultraviolet, which, you know, our eyes don't detect, but it's out there. We know it's there. So it's the same principle. We're just detecting a certain level of energy and vibration that takes physical form, but it's part of a larger stream of energy out there. And I guess the best thing I can say is try and understand that stream that you don't see, because you can see it and you can contact it. And I think the comforting thing, you know what, we'll talk about fear. All right, fear is the biggest impediment in human existence. And what really I think helps to mitigate the fear in all this is that when you understand that everything is the projection, like Max Planck said, of one conscious intelligence. And sciences, believe it or not, the advanced edges of sciences are leading more and more to that conclusion, that the universe operates more like a giant thought than a giant, you know, mechanistic machine. But when you understand that there is that intelligence that's out there, and it's 24/7, and it's the basis for so-called psychic experiences and other things that people have, that I had and other people have, you understand that you're actually part of that stream of consciousness. So I liken it to the fact that take a power grid, okay? You have the central source for the power grid, but then you have relay stations to distribute the power around, right? So that's what we are. We are part of this consciousness. We're not separate creations. We're fully part of this consciousness in diluted form, and we don't really remember much of it, but we are part of this consciousness, and we do contribute to the creation of reality as these little relay stations, because we're part of this stream of consciousness. So when you hear a lot of this new age stuff about co-creation and everything else, there is a basis to it. Okay, there definitely is a basis to that. I think that can be scientifically, indicated, if not demonstrated. So once you realize that, you realize that this is just one experience that we're having as multidimensional creatures. And, when we leave this body, which is, impermanent, the part of us that is permanent, that projected ourselves here, goes on to other levels of experience, other dimensions of experience. And this is kind of like, kindergarten here. We take what we learn and we bring it, up to these other dimensions of experience. And that really is the purpose of humanity. Because, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we were kind of really given a bum steer. We were led to believe that there was this sort of, God on a throne, like this emperor, and he waved his wand, and out of the dust of the earth, human beings were born like these separate creations. Okay. So a creation is something separate from the creator. Geppetto created Pinocchio. Pinocchio was the creation. Geppetto was the creator. Okay. But what the ancient wisdom tells us, and what quantum physics, I think, is also indicating, is that we were not creations, but we were projections or emanations of this one consciousness. So we're not separated from our so-called creator. We are part and parcel of that creative force. Yes, albeit in a limited, diluted form, and we don't have that whole supreme consciousness, because if we did, we wouldn't be individuals. We'd just be absorbed back into the whole. But the purpose of individual experience is to have a limited form of consciousness where you can think of yourself as individual, but you still contain the parts of the whole within you. That's how individuality works. So when you realize all these things, I do think, and you experience them through your meditation, through your contemplation, through your building up your belief system in this, fear starts to recede. Mm-hmm. The fear of living starts to recede.
Absolutely. And when you let go of that fear, you actually start living life, or living like in conjunction with that consciousness. And it sounds like your book, and from what I took out of it, is you're bridging that quantum knowledge and the spirituality and really, the humanity part of life to show people that we can have a fulfilling and joyful and happy and loving life by knowing we're all part of this bigger consciousness, this bigger awareness. And there's principles. So what would you like to share about the principles that are involved? And if people understand those principles, then it doesn't seem woo-woo what you're talking about. It actually makes sense.
Well, I mean, the principles that I deal with basically 4 principles to try and help people, elevate their consciousness. And that I try to get them to recognize that there's 4 principles, and that is faith, belief, knowledge, and revelation. So I would say faith is the lowest rung on the ladder there, because faith is essentially something that you take third hand from some other source without any proof of its truth, and you take it as truth. Knowledge is kind of bifurcated. There's a couple types of knowledge. The lower form of knowledge, you can read things, and again, you heard that old thing, people believe what they see in the news, right? Well, the news ain't always right. So, this is an imperfect form of knowledge. What you read, you can acquire from, intellectually, but it's not always the case. So, if you take that kind of knowledge and you take faith, you can well develop a belief system that's in error. The only way that you can really understand the truth of something is by experiencing it. So, for example, if I tell you that fire burns, let's say you're kind of a novice to the world, and I tell you that fire burns, you can take that on faith that fire burns, but it's only when you put your hand in the fire that you know the truth of that. So I could just as well tell you, fire cools things down. I could lie to you and say fire cools things down. And again, you wouldn't really know the truth or the falsehood of that statement until you put your hand in the fire. So what we're saying here is that the cutting edge of growth here is experience. And there is a higher form of knowledge called experiential knowledge. And this is what the Gnostic masters did. They went over to the other side, and they brought back information from these higher dimensions, from this higher source. And this information proved to be quite true in the material world, because these guys described the God particle, the Big Bang, and parallel universes thousands of years before quantum physics did. So that's how we know there's some truth to it, because we now have the science of quantum physics to weigh against statements that many people probably didn't understand 2,000 years ago, but they were deep truths. So you see, when you start to experience these things, you then start to get to revelation, which is the highest form. Revelation is where you become your own prophet. You can now start to weigh these things against the matrix of your own experience. And that is when you really start to feel like you're on solid ground. So I often start my talks by telling people, don't believe a damn thing I'm going to tell you. And they sit there scratching their heads and they say, well, what did I pay to come to this thing for? And I'm saying, don't take me literally in the sense that I want you to listen to what I have to say, and I want you to consider what I have to say. But don't take anything that I have to say as gospel. This isn't the church of Peter. All I am is a signpost trying to help you on a journey. And you're the one who has to walk that path, and you're the one who has to prove these things out. So, I can inspire, I can give you a starting point, but I don't want you to believe me or anybody else until you get the knowledge and maturity to weigh these things in your own experience.
Awesome. I love that. So you talk about experiential, and in your book, you share some of your own personal experiences that you've had. And I would say, people who watch our talk today, that they've had their own experiences, and some may have shared it, some may keep it to themselves because they think it's so weird. But I'd love to hear one of your most profound experiences, and then how what you have in this book sheds light and gives you comfort in that you're not crazy, and everything is okay with the experience that you've had.
Well, the thing is, there's been so many of them that it's kind of hard to single anything out. I mean, it all started off when I found out that I was a very accurate medical intuitive, and all somebody had to do was give me the name, age, and address of a person, and I could, pretty well diagnose their physical or, psychological problem. But I had so many experiences, I was in a remote viewing class, and they several hundred people, and they said, well, we have a picture here. We're not going to show you, but you draw it out and see what you see. Well, the picture that I drew was really kind of incongruous, because it was a boat on a lake, but in the middle of a dry desert with a cactus in the background, and the boat passing by the cactus. Well, the drawing that I drew was dead on out of everybody in the room. But that didn't surprise me, because by that time I'd been through clairaudience, clairvoyance, telemetry, all kinds of phenomena. But these phenomena, spoon bending and things like that, these phenomena can become kind of parlor tricks in a way if you just get so enamored about them. I mean, you have to figure out a little bit of a higher purpose for this, what this is for. So I've had, instances where I saved my life and my father's life when we were in Africa. This is in the Chicken Soup for the Soul book. We were in Africa, and we had to get up to an appointment in about an 8-hour drive that goes through a lot of jungle road from south part of Nigeria to the north part. And we really had to get this appointment, but I had this premonition just as we were stepping into this kind of a minibus with about 6 or 7 other people in it. And I said, we can't get in here. I said, something's really wrong. And he, my father by that time had seen some of my stuff in practice. So, we really had to get this appointment, and he said, I hope you're right about this, but he did acquiesce, and they were attacked in the jungle by these brigands, and one of the people was killed. So, I mean, there's so many times this has saved my life. It's what helped me write 25-time award-winning book series, the First Souls trilogy, Pope Annalisa and the First Souls trilogy. It was almost like, I had channeled a lot of the information. And in fact, Om Times Magazine did an article about Pope Annalisa and how many of the geopolitical predictions in the book came true, like the Second Gulf War, Iran going nuclear, acquiring a nuclear program, a whole a new third world pope coming in that took his own name rather than the name of a papal name like Benedict or something like that. A whole bunch of things, were predicted in Pope Annalisa that subsequently came to pass. So at times, I didn't even feel like I wrote the book. I felt like somebody else was writing it for me. I was like channeling. So see, these are just some examples of the kind of things, beneficial things that people can experience when they connect with this channel. And I liken it to like this cosmic radio program that's broadcasting 24/7. Only we don't know it unless we hit that dial just right, unless we get that frequency. And then it comes through and the information is astonishing. And you realize there's this whole new worlds. There's a whole nother source of information, guiding information coming out there. But most of us just don't attune to that frequency.
So I have a question. Do you believe that there's infinite more information that's available that we just haven't brought to our conscious awareness in the physical form, that what you share in the book and the Gnostics and things that have been revealed up to this point in time, there's still a lot more to be discovered. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, actually, I think the progression in life is less a matter of discovery than it is a matter of remembrance. I think we know deep inside us everything there is to know, and everything we do is really modeled on some some higher plane. I mean, the function of our computers, and there was an old adage, my favorite Hermetic adage: as it is above, so it is below. The pattern of everything we do down here, everything, every new technical achievement, everything we discover, that pattern already exists at a higher level. And we're essentially imitating that in physical forms. So yes, there is an infinite source of information out there.
Well, that causes me to think about the mirror effect. Is there anything in your book that you feel reflects that concept of the as above, so below, but also with that quantum physics, the quantum level and the spiritual level, everything's like a mirror and the duality. So maybe share your thoughts on
that. Not sure what exactly you were.
How to go down?
Can you restate that in another way?
Absolutely. So kind of like the law of attraction, what goes around comes around. So we have polarity. And then we have the mirror effect. A lot of times things mimic and kind of follow along with what we think in our patterns. So how does that apply to the information that you have in your book and what you're trying to share with people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way that would come to mind is that in the ancient text, the supreme force, whether you want to call it God, the supreme being, the ultimate force, names don't really matter. It's all the same thing. Projected itself in binary forms that the ancients called male and female. So that's why we have an apparent duality in this world. We have yin and yang, positive and negative, plus and minus. In computers, we have the binary zeros and ones that provide the information that comes on your computer screen. Everything is sort of, bifurcated in that way, because that's the way that the divine pattern projected itself out into these, binary forms. And the reason for that is because it's the energy and the friction and the heat that's created, between the interplay of those poles, like the positive and negative charges of a battery, and that have the energy, that create the energy to propel things forward. So you could call it the divine battery in a way. Mm-hmm. And I think that the way that might come down in a practical sense to help people is to recognize that we do have a right and a left brain. We do have a male and female qualities in all of us. Carl Jung said that we have the anima and the animus in us, and that is the male and the female and the female and the male. So we have attributes of both. Now, that doesn't mean we're transgender or hermaphrodites. In today's world, people may interpret it that way. It's not that way at all. What it really means is that our instincts, that are the way that things electrically charge through us can be emphasized or de-emphasized. So we have left brain people who are more logical and analytical, and we have right brain people who are more kind of intuitive. And the intuition is generally associated with the female aspect of the female polarity. So one thing that we can do is understand that we really want to cultivate this intuition within us, this female part of us, meaning the intuitive sense. And incidentally, this may explain why sensitive people or females who are more open to this type of thinking, they vibe that way, why they are more intuitive and open to these things. And I remember 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I started going to these alternative convention, like the consciousness conventions and things like that. If there were 200 people in the room, it would be like 199 women and me. And now you go to these things and it's roughly equal. It's roughly fit.
Right.
And that to me shows an increased level of consciousness, and that people are understanding that cultivating the intuitive, which is for logical people, it's counter. Well, if I can't see it and I can't number it, I don't believe it.
Right.
Well, more and more people are coming around to an appreciation of the intuitive understanding of this sort of binary world that we live in.
Well, and maybe that explains why the knowledge of the quantum level and the spiritual really being interconnected is now more present, and people like you writing about it, that we're ready to receive that information on a global scale, a mass conscious scale. I wanted to point out that you had a couple of charts in your book, and the mind levels. I really like how you break down your two charts that I marked. So tell me a little bit about the mind levels.
Yeah, well, we have several levels of mind. We have the conscious, the unconscious, the subconscious, and then you could say we also have the higher consciousness from which they all derive, and they have different functions. Okay, the conscious mind is what you and I are using right now. We use that in sort of our everyday discourse, and the subconscious contains information that is readily retrievable. I mean, we're not thinking about it all the time, but if we have to recall what's in the subconscious, we can do that. The unconscious is the murkiest place, and that is where it's kind of the battleground between what Carl Jung called the shadow and which are unresolved issues, traumas, or other things like that, but also the unconscious is the source by which the supreme consciousness kind of infiltrates our thinking process. So these things that we're talking about achieving, like getting in touch with a higher source of consciousness, I do believe a lot of that is essentially being able to dredge those things up out of the unconscious. So the unconscious is very interesting because it's a little bit of the, where the light and shadow of our lives, plays out. And, hopefully when you're a healthy human being, you're able to retrieve more of the material out of the unconscious and process it in a way that it becomes out in the open and healthy and not, repressed complexes.
Which I think would cause challenges in people's lives because they're not aware that it's there, but it still has an impact on decision making or their thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's largely where the script of our lives is written. It's sort of where the master script lies there, and that's where and that's where meditation has a very important role, because one of our ways of getting in touch with that subconscious information, whether it's something good or something that we need to work on, getting in touch with that subconscious is a prime focus of meditation. Those impressions and images when you're still and you're quiet, can come to the fore, and you can start to deal with them. Because in operating off of our regular consciousness every day, we got to work, we got to support the family, we got to be on the job, we got to be this and that. You just don't have time. It's too hectic. That's the whole purpose of meditation, is to still that chatter, and get in touch with these deeper levels.
Which I would think would enhance all the six senses, the intuition and the clairaudient and clairsentient, which then people can have the experiences that you've been talking about, and that in turn might shift people into a higher consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Like Edgar Cayce, the famous psychic Edgar Cayce, when he did all his amazing things in a sleep or trance state. And when he woke up, he couldn't remember any of it. I mean, he was a devout Christian, but the stuff that he was telling people in his trance state, which was very, very deep and usually true, a lot of that contradicted his, Bible Belt upbringing. It was a little shocking to him. So in my case, it actually started. It just bled through, and I didn't have to go into a sleep trance or anything. The information just would come to me. My everyday waking consciousness. So after a point, I think I'm not telling people there's a point where they should stop meditating, but what I'm saying is that after a point, the consciousness, the higher vibration does have a chance to bleed through to your everyday waking, walking, talking consciousness.
And then that, I would think, causes someone to have new perspectives and new perception of the world around them, and even of themselves.
It does. I also found there was a downside to it. I mean, literally, you can get to a point. I was at a point where it was really difficult for me, because I was like a sponge. And I mean, I just walked down the street, I'd pass by somebody, and I'd be picking up all this information from them, which is why people like myself stopped being medical intuitives. After a while, like Carolyn Mace and almost everybody I know that was a medical intuitive usually stops after a point, because when you open yourself up to be able to channel that stuff, sometimes it's hard to shut the faucet off. Mm-hmm. And it can really, I mean, it's one point, it can almost like drive you insane, So right. Yeah, you have to really learn, how to control that too. But if you keep your mind focused on the highest and the best good, and the fact that the source is a source of good and it's a source of love and everything else, that helps keep you grounded.
Absolutely. So there was page 189. You talk about source fragmented from different layers of perception. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
Okay, you're going to have to remind me a little bit more about that passage. What was said in there?
I think it was.
I can't remember the page.
Let me see. So I think it talks about our levels of. We have levels and layers of perception, and it's fragmented, and yet, it's all part of that one source.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was talking about there is that it goes really back to the very nature of creation. And you had the one source of everything. It was just a singularity. Okay. It was the only thing in existence. And in order to experience itself, it was compelled to project out other sources of consciousness. So, I mean, think about it for a second. If you're the everything, it's a very static existence. You exist. I am that I am, but without other things or points of consciousness in which to contrast yourself or reflect upon yourself, you don't really know what you are. You're not experiencing. You're just existing and not experiencing. So the ancients said that in order to experience, this was the impetus behind this one source for projecting out other points of consciousness. Now, these other points of consciousness have been called many things. In Judeo-Christian terms, you could call them spirits or angels. In psychological terms, you can call them archetypes. What they really were different dimensions of conscious vibrations. They weren't people. We can talk about them as people to make them more understandable, but they were separate sources, separate envelopes of conscious energy, just like the Supreme Source was. And they knew themselves to be themselves, but they also knew that they were part of the Source. In order to have individual experience, the Supreme Consciousness had to limit itself. It had to dumb itself down, in effect, in order to experience individuality. Because think of it for a second. If you just contain the consciousness of everything, you could go right back into being the everything. You wouldn't have any individuality. So the individual spirits or points of consciousness that were projected had to have a limitation. They had to be, their consciousness had to be limited so that they could perceive themselves as themselves. Okay. So that's the source of individuality. Now, it really comes right down to it. There's this consciousness projected itself out in different multiple levels. And I liken it to, let's say a CD, the first copy of a CD always has the highest fidelity. The next copy after that, a little bit less clear. The next copy after that, a little bit less clear. That's the way creation proceeded, according to the Gnostics, so that there was a dilution of consciousness at each different level of existence. And the reason for that was so that individual experience could be gained, okay? And we are probably the lowest level or the highest level of individuality and experience, but the lowest level of consciousness. There's kind of an inverse proportion there. So this illusion, the fragmentation of our minds, while we have three different sort of sets of consciousness, and we have a right and left brain, and all these factors. This is what contributes to the illusion of us being individual beings in a physical body. Okay, these are mechanisms that were necessary to create those firewalls that allow us to separate from the Supreme Consciousness in order to have individual experience. But you could say, well, why? What's the purpose of that? Well, I think it shows that humanity has a very high purpose, because essentially, that you probably heard that cliche about we're spirits having a human experience. At one time, I thought I coined that, and then I heard it so much, I said, "God, I must have heard it somewhere." I thought that I did it, but whatever the case is, it's really quite true that what we really are is the fingers of God touching the face of this world, and our purpose is to spiritualize the material and bring the experience of the material back to spirit, which otherwise it would never be able to experience this form of existence. But we are enabling that to happen with our little smoke and mirror game being down here. And one day, I think what will happen is that old adage from the Bible that, one day the kingdom of heaven shall come to earth. I do believe that in the Judaic tradition and in the Christian esoteric tradition, it really says the end game of all this is that one day all the worlds will become one, that maybe we get back to the original state of our being when we came here, where we could go in and out of body at will until we started to identify our skin as the boundaries of our skin as our reality. We forgot where we came from. But when that consciousness level is achieved by the bulk of us, that's when I think these veils between the dimensions, start to evaporate, and everything becomes truly one unified whole.
And I think you're correct. I don't know how many millions of years that might take, but I think it's probably on the horizon somewhere. And
remember, a million years to us here is nothing up there.
Well, that's true. That's true. The statement, what you are seeking is seeking you, kept coming to mind as you were talking. And I feel like there's this constant, cycle that is occurring. And as that cycle is going through, it keeps going to a higher level of consciousness and awareness. So from, Neanderthal caveman days, we've come a long way in consciousness and awareness to where we are today. So I think that cycle pattern the ability for us to dig deeper into the quantum level and the spiritual level. I think there's hope for us to find that that balance, and the more people to understand what you present in this incredible book.
I see life more as a spiral than a circle.
Well, it is.
Spiral.
Yeah, it's that too, because we're spiraling up.
Right.
Right, but at the same time, what I envision as a circle is that, the pattern completes itself, but then spirals up to the next level, and then the pattern completes itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So
same thing.
Yeah, just a different visual, which is okay.
Right.
But Peter, this has been an enlightening conversation, and I appreciate you sharing. And there's a lot more that is in the books. I hope people will find this conversation inspiring to go and get your book and read the book itself. So where can people find your book and information about you?
Yeah, the best place to go to is petercanova.com. That's PeterCanova.com, which is my website. I also have a website for the fictional trilogy. You can go to Pope Annalisa, PopeAnnalisa.com. That is a fictional trilogy which won like 25 awards, that is based on the principles that are in quantum spirituality. So quantum spirituality is sort of like the textbook in a way. The trilogy is sort of like the entertaining form of getting these principles out there in, these three spiritual thrillers, they are very, everyone has said that they're page turners. If you go to those sites and look that information up, it'll tell you a lot.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Peter. This has been great. And maybe we'll have a follow-up conversation and talk a little bit more about what you're doing and how things are going in your next book, because I think you have some other books coming down the pipeline, right?
Well, possibly. Right now, we're spending a lot of time working on getting Pope Annalisa into a TV series. I have a partner who's an ex-executive at HBO, and we're out pounding the pavement in Hollywood here. We've been close before. Very hard to do anything in Hollywood these days, or on TV these days. But I think eventually we're going to get there, and I hope so, because that way this message can really get out to a much larger mass audience. And,
absolutely.
You couldn't really make a book out of quantum spirituality, but you can out of the trilogy. So that's kind of why I wrote a trilogy in the first place.
Got it. Well, that's exciting. All right. Well, thank you, Peter. And we will talk again soon.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Bye.
You're welcome.